So the newest tournament Stardom brought in, and they only kicked this off this year, is the Triangle Derby, and that is a trios tournament. So Stardom has kind of done trios tournaments in the past, like they would do the faction tournaments over like two shows or over one show sometimes. So it just made sense to eventually do a league of 6 woman tags because they are a faction based company. Everybody has allies. There's nobody on their own. So a trios tournament made a lot of sense. And earlier this year, they did bring one in. It is a 2 block tournament. You do not wrestle the teams in your block. You wrestle the teams in the other block. And they've started to bring that in for the tag tournament as well, which I don't love that format, but that's what they
Well,
seem to be going with.
they didn't do it last year for the tag tournament. It's just they
Yeah.
sometimes do it. They do
Yeah,
it
they
sporadically.
they pick and choose really. The rules of these tournaments aren't set. They do change them just year to year sometimes. Um, but this year for the inaugural Triangle Derby, it was two blocks. You wrestle the teams in the other block. Top 2 teams of each block go through. There was semifinals and finals, and like presumably the winner of the tournament gets an Artist of Stardom title match. The Artist of Stardom belts are the trios belts. Um, but
This
this
year,
year,
the
yeah,
champions won,
yeah,
so it didn't really work out that way.
yeah. So we don't know if that's the case. But with like Prominence, who are the title holders, were like, well, we're in the final, so let's put our artist belts on the line in the final as well. So the final became both a tournament final and a title match. So I have no idea. That's presumably not going to be a thing for every tournament. But that was how the Triangle Derby unfolded this year. Um, The Derby, though, I feel like you might agree, it was very underwhelming. It wasn't great.
It was definitely a way to fill time in between the tag league, which is a bigger tournament, and the Cinderella, which is a also a bigger tournament that's coming up soon. They just wanted to fill some dead air the first few months of the year. So outside of key championships or not championships, key wrestlers in the tournament, a lot of people just kind of took the day off on
Mm.
a lot of these. So, like in this year's at least, because for most of the tournaments we have a lot of prior knowledge, we have a lot of you know uh just history to like go back off of. For this year, the first Triangle Derby tournament, it was definitely the fourth most important tournament of the year. You know what I mean? Like it's definitely the distant relative to the more bigger tournaments for Stardom. But there were some good matches, some good stuff, but definitely if if you're someone like me who likes to watch a tournament in full as much as possible, this is one of those ones that is less necessary for you to watch every single match, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's definitely like I copped this very early on, but almost every match ended up where the clear loser and air quotes worst member of her team would be in the ring for a long time with the obvious winner. And that was kind of where, you know, usually in trios matches in Stardom, you'll get like lots of really cool pairings going at it. But in the Triangle Derby, for some reason, it was always, okay, you're going to get your ass kicked, and you're really good, and that's it. And we very rarely got the best wrestlers interacting, or even the best pairings. Um, so it was really just an odd tournament that was really heavily carried by the outsiders. Um, but I figure if they do it again, they might shorten it or they might change the format. I don't really know. There is potential there though. Like when
Oh,
it was
certainly.
first announced, we were both like, "Oh, this makes obvious sense, right?"
Yeah, totally. I mean, the trios, especially, in the past few years, the trios belts and just trios in general have become a very key part of the Stardom calendar. So it makes sense for them to have their own tournament. I know, we can't get to all of the tournaments Stardom has ever done, but for a time, the High Speed Championship was kind of getting uh, a lot of members in the division because of foreigners and whatnot. So they did a High Speed Grand Prix. That didn't last very long because I think COVID cut it off. But they have these divisional tournaments every once in a while. This one seems to be the one that's going to be staying around long term. and it probably makes the most sense because there is the most trios. You can get a lot of people on these cards, and it makes the cards more interesting than just, any given card of just, 4-on-4 matches, 5-on-5 matches just thrown in there. It made it that some of these matches had more stakes than others, even though they were still just these mostly not necessary to watch shows, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And that tournament ran from January up until 2 weeks ago. We're recording this on the 21st of March, so it lasted from January 6th until like the 10th of March. It was a very long tournament. Um,
Yes.
and it seems to be the way Stardom's going to kick off their year. It has slot in right after Stardom Dream Queendom, which is like the big um, year-end show kind of thing, and then they go into the Triangle Derby, and that's when they like kickstart a lot of their storytelling for the next big shows. So it does seem to have found a spot in the calendar, but maybe one that doesn't lend it to being a very great tournament because it's always going to be one of the first building blocks to other things, you know.
Yeah, totally.
Um, But I suppose that's enough on the Derby because there's not really a lot else on it because it is so new. Um, Moving up to I guess the next most important tournament, you have the Goddess of Stardom Tag League, and as the name might suggest, that is Stardom's tag tournament. Um, if you're a fan of New Japan, All Japan, any pure promotion, you know the tag tournaments they're kind of iffy. Like I find
Very
that
hit or miss.
yeah, like the Goddess tournament was it 2 years ago? Was just such a drag. It was no fun. It was like right
Yeah.
after one of the best GPs ever. We were all waiting for the big December show. It was just kind of dead. And then last year, the tag tournament was fantastic. Like we had a ball of a time, but it was still in that like dead zone between the GP and Dream Queendom, but it was just so much better than usual. Um, so the Goddess of Stardom Tag League is one where sometimes it is great and sometimes it's a bit iffy.
No, yeah, that's 1% the case. I feel like, I've been watching for almost what, 5 years now,
Mm.
and every tag tournament gives something different, but it also sometimes lacks certain things. Uh, there have been some great teams in tag league that don't necessarily get to tag very often. Uh, for people who are more in tune with Stardom, Saya Kamitani and Saya Ida tagged up for like the first and only time long term in the tag league in 2019, and that was when a lot of their personalities started to grow, right? Because they both were pretty new and they allowed themselves to really like flesh out their characters, right? And that was a really fun time for them, even though they weren't the greatest team. It really like it lended itself to them. But then certain years there's not a lot of that. It's kind of just like matches for the sake of matches, and eventually someone's going to win. Uh, which I guess you could just kind of say is wrestling. But in this case, I think the tag league, because Stardom has such a great tag style, in my opinion, it should be really great, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes there are certain things that kind of hold it back a bit. Whether it's the teams that are involved or it's just the vibe of the shows that they are on. It definitely takes a backseat role to the other tournaments that we will talk about in a minute.
Yeah, and I suppose that is because it's like after the GP where, everybody's
Yeah,
well, not everybody, but a lot of the roster has done a pretty hellacious schedule of singles matches, so a lot of people aren't going 100%. And then the people
and
who are
also
going 100% are like the middle of the card.
and also the GP is historically known to take a toll on wrestlers' bodies, obviously. So not only are they like not going at 100% because they just went at 100% for months before that. But also some of them might be injured. So like, I think it was that year that you were talking about. Uh, one half the tag team champions was Julia, and she was absent because she got hurt.
Mm.
And that kind of takes away a big part of it. Like a big part of tag league is defeating the only tag team champions at that time that are in the company. Like that's a big part of it is the bounty hunting, I like to call it. But sometimes because of injuries and because of what happens earlier in the year, what happens in the 5 star, it affects the quality of life of the tournament that follows it, which is the Gaza Star Tag League.
Yeah. And I suppose it's another one of those where the winners get a tag title shot, and
Yeah.
so you know there's no real huge reward for winning it. I don't think it's a real launching point or anything. Like whoever wins is just the challengers, and that's about it. It's not an important tournament, but it does fill a spot, and sometimes it's very entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, like last year, 7 Up had like a star-making performance because
Hmm.
if you know anything about us, we were kind of hesitant about the pairing of you and Nai Takahashi, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But they really had a star-making performance in that tag league, and then they won it, and then they went on to win the championships, and it became like a real thing. That's like, oh, their starting point was really that tag league. But if you look at it, neither of them were in the 5 star, so that also aids in their run as in that tag league. So it's definitely a hit or miss tournament. There have been some great tournaments and some great tournament finals, especially back in the day with like Momo in Queen's Quest. I think she really excelled in basically every goddess tournament that she was in. But more or less, there are a lot of cases where it just is a step down from the singles tournaments in the company.
Definitely, definitely. And I suppose that's really all we can say on the Goddess tournament. It's as I mentioned, it's two blocks, or maybe I mentioned this. It's two blocks. Sometimes you wrestle the teams in your own block. Sometimes you wrestle the teams in the other block. Generally, it's a 15-minute time limit for every match, so they're usually on the shorter side. Um, and they don't do semifinals for this one. The two teams go into the final. So the Triangle Derby is actually the only one, the only block tournament where people go to semifinals, which I think was just to bump it out a little bit more so they could get more mileage out of it.
Yeah.
But like for the GP, the block winners.
Yeah. I like semifinals in tournaments. I personally think it's like interesting for the block tournaments, but it is only used in the first version of the Triangle Derby. We don't know if they'll continue to do it in that way, but
Hmm.
as of now, that's the only one that does that sort of thing.
Indeed. Um, Now, on to the next highest tournament in the totem pole, and this is a pretty big one. This is the Cinderella Tournament. This usually happens in the springtime. I think about April, May, generally is when it happens. And the Cinderella Tournament has had a few different formats over the years, but it has always been a fairly important tournament. It reminds me of like the best of the New Japan Cup in that at its finest, the New Japan Cup could really put somebody to the next level. Kind of like
Yeah.
they did this year, and I know this is a spoiler, but with like Sonata, where Sonata winning it feels like, okay, he's moving on to the next step. He's probably not going to beat Okada, but he's clearly evolved from where he was. And I think Cinderella Tournament, more often than not, does that, right? Like with Arisa Hoshiki, that was her I'm back, I'm fully here, like this is my company moment. With Julia, that was her, you know, yeah, I had the draw with Hannah, but now I'm a winner. I'm going to become white belt champion. This is my company. Tam Nakano, did Tam win it? Tam
Yeah, she
did win
did.
it. Yeah, Tam won it, and
Wait,
she was it Tam or
that
was it
was
Saya?
it was Saya. Saya
Yeah,
won it
so
and Tam
yeah,
was champion. That was
yes.
that was the thing.
So Saya Kamatani won it, and for Saya Kamatani, it was also okay. I am putting myself in the conversation to be the white belt champion. And with Mirai won it, and it was like, okay, Mirai is legitimate. So like the Cinderella tournament so far has been a very important one for Stardom in that the winner is usually being set up for something important. You won't always get to do that. Like I feel like this year, whoever wins it won't get that because of how they've laid it out this year. But generally, winning the Cinderella tournament is really important.
Yeah, totally. And it used to be like to give a little bit of background. It used to be a 1 day tournament, and that is why it has a different set of rules, like the time limit and the overtop rope and stuff like that. Uh, they used to have it on 1 day. Nowadays they do it over 4 days roughly. Uh, and yeah, it's single elimination. It is definitely used to like put somebody. to the next level, right?
Mhm.
For the 5 star, which we'll talk about in a minute, it's that's always kind of been like cementing someone at their spot and being like, okay, this is like superstardom. Like
Yeah.
they are firmly the next up. Like they're there now, right? Whereas with the Cinderella tournament, it's more of like a star making thing. I mean, Sai Kamatani, who won it in 2021, she was, that was her first like singles, like big singles opportunity ever. Like she had future Stardom Championship matches, whatnot, but that was like her defining moment from where she was a rookie and like somebody on the other card to somebody who is firmly in the place of a white belt champion, even if they don't win the championship yet. Like you said, it is similar to New Japan Cup. Uh, and yeah, it definitely held a bit more mystique back in the day, I would say. Uh, it used to be, like I said, held in Korakuen every year, and that used to be their biggest single show draw, pretty much. Like they would sell out Korakuen basically every single year with the Cinderella tournament because it was a very unique tournament and it had a very unique vibe to it. The winner of it doesn't necessarily get a white belt or a red belt match. Like they could choose which one, just like the 5 star, which we'll get to in a minute. But it is technically just they get a wish of their own, which obviously to this point has only been championship matches. But you can pick the red belt, you can pick the white belt. It doesn't really matter. Uh, but usually it's a white belt championship match after you win the Cinderella.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on it there. The Cinderella tournament has its own set of rules, which is what keeps it so special on the Stardom calendar. So they did briefly experiment with like 15-minute time limits for all the matches, but I believe for this year and last year that's down to 10 minutes. So every match up until a certain point is 10 minutes. You can win by pinfall, submission, or over the top rope elimination. And if the match goes to a draw, both wrestlers are out. So it's always had that very different feel to it where because of the over the top rules and because you can get eliminated without even losing, there's always been that kind of aura of unpredictability to it. And that's why it's always stood out so much because I mean Arisa Hoshiki beaten multiple people in one show, you just can't touch that, right? Like that's the easiest way of putting somebody to the next level in wrestling is having them beat multiple people. But you can also then not have them beat like the biggest stars because I think Arisa Hoshiki beat like Konami in the final, was it? Or the final.
Yeah.
Because all of the biggest names can go out by getting thrown over the top rope. Or you can throw a big name over the top rope and have that be your moment. So the rules have always lended it to being a really different and interesting tournament. Um, and the more they play into that, the better it is usually. But I feel like the rules always give them that flexibility of having it be a tournament that can be won by people outside of the main event picture.
Yeah, it's very much a case of you aren't going to see Sherry versus Utami in the final, or I guess I should say Julia versus Sherry in the final, who are probably the most protected wrestlers in the company, because either of them at any point can get thrown over the top rope or can get forced into a draw and get eliminated in the first round. That's what really changes it and separates it from a tournament like the New Japan Cup or any single elimination tournament, really, that it has that strict rule set so that it allows for people to move forward that wouldn't necessarily move forward in certain other circumstances. I mean, last year it was Koguma who was the runner-up. Obviously,
Mm.
Koguma had a roll-up and she had a flash pin. She was very um, smart about how she wins matches regardless, but she found herself out of 31 wrestlers, she found herself in the second place, right? That's not something that you would see in a 5 star Grand Prix. Like Koguma, as much as I love her, she's not going to be she's not going to be in the finals of the 5 star Grand Prix. So you do get to see a little bit of flavor and a little bit of different vibes from the Cinderella tournament, uh, even to this day, as it becomes a bit more. I don't want to say like basic, but it becomes a bit more streamlined with what you expect out of this sort of tournament. It still has the rule set that kind of allows some uniqueness to And I personally am a big fan of that rule set. Some people aren't, but I think it's a great differentiator for the tournament.
Yeah, I mean it's not like I know I compare it to the New Japan Cup, but it isn't a one-to-one. Like it's not a match quality work rate tournament if that's what you're looking for. Like they have to do all of the first round on one show. You know, like people are gonna have short matches, things are gonna be sprints. You're not getting your spreadsheet matches or whatever it is. Like it's a very distinct tournament, and that's why people enjoy it so much. Um, Definitely it's not what it once was because you can't replicate that, one show, one night star making performance kind of thing. But it is still a very important tournament in the Stardom sphere that can do a lot for people. Um, and I think it's just one that so long as they treat it the way they have, it'll always be somewhat interesting because you never know if the winner is going to be, you never know what the winner is going to do. Like the winner might be the next white belt champion, or they might be, somebody who's in a big spot come the end of the year. It's always going to be, as long as they treat it the way they do, it's always going to have that importance to it.
Yeah, totally. And it for me, it was one of the first things that got me interested in Stardom was the Cinderella Tournament of 2018, which Momo won against B Priestley. That was like I remember following the results that night and like watching as everybody got eliminated, and I was like, oh, what is like I was like really interested, even though I hadn't been watching the company much, uh, or at all actually at that point. I was like interested in like, oh, okay, so like this person that I know got eliminated, so like that's wild. It's a really fun thing to just watch play out, I guess. And like not to dwell on it, but it was a different vibe when it was the one night in Cork and Hall. But it still has that mystique to it, and it's very interesting. And I think it's one of the more fun things, one of the more fun events in wrestling of over the year. I
Yeah,
really enjoy it a lot.
yeah, big time. Um, Now, despite us waxing lyrical about it, it is definitely the number two tournament in Stardom. The number one tournament and the
100%.
biggest tournament is the five-star Grand Prix. And this is your more typical, compare it to anything, your G1, your Champion Carnival, your N1 Victory, your Japan Grand Prix. This is your round robin, the best of the best, two blocks of your top names all going at it for a chance to win or to challenge for one of the top two belts at a big show. Um, and this historically has always been Stardom's like number biggest tournament. And kind of like Dylan said earlier, when you win this, you are cemented as the one. Like there's a very small pool of people that could win this tournament, and a very small pool of people have won the tournament. Uh, when you're talking about former winners, like Io Shirai is the only person to win it twice, I believe. So like that's how difficult it is to win this tournament. Um,
Io didn't win it twice.
did you not? You sure?
No.
Was it my?
I don't think nobody's won it
Nobody's
twice.
won it twice.
Mayu's
Okay.
going to win it twice.
Okay. All
That's
right.
what everybody's
I
kind of rooting
I
for
thought
is
EO
Mayu
had
winning
won
it twice.
twice. But all right. Yeah. So nobody's won it twice. Like that's how difficult it is to win this tournament. Um, former winners. You're talking about people like Utami Hayashishita, Mayu Iwatani, Io Shirai. Last year you had Julia. Before that you had Suri. Like kind of a who's who of Stardom, really. Like when you've won this tournament, that's it, right?
Yeah, totally. There's a single outlier in that story, but it's besides the point. Um, not trying to throw shade at Tony Storm, but yeah, it is very much a matter of if you win this, you are a big freaking deal. And over the past few years, it has also meant that you win the championship. Like since 2020, I mean, 2019, Hana lost her challenge at
Hmm.
the follow-up match, but since the winner has gotten matches at like pay-per-views, they've always won. The winner of the five stars consistently won the championship since Stardom has moved to pay-per-views. So, maybe the serial will change, but it's very indicative of where you're at in the company. It's like you are going to win the world championship, if not right now, eventually. Uh, and it's a big deal. And the matches are great. I think that's another thing that maybe differs from the Cinderella is that the matches are made to be like every single match is meant to be this is a big deal. 2 points means the world, and they are going to kill each other for it. And they all have very different vibes, obviously, but they maintain that level of seriousness and importance throughout the tournament, which is very impressive for such a long tournament because it is a round robin tournament.
Yeah, and over the last 2 years, like the quality of the GP has been absurd. And
Yes.
like the GP final is genuinely one of the most absurd cards you're going to see all year. Like the one last year was one of the best shows I've ever seen, right? Like you're talking like the best Joshi stuff since Dream Slam was a thing, right? Like that's how just ridiculous these cards have been in terms of sheer big matches. Um,
And the show the year prior ended with Shuri Momo, which is one of my favorite matches of like the past decade.
yeah, like that
Like it was incredible.
that one final had what was it was like Takumi and Shuri, Shuri and Momo, Mayu and Kid, wasn't it? Was it Mayu and Kid?
Yes,
Yeah, like you would
it was
you
amazing.
all of these like great matches on one show, and then last year they somehow outdid that by doing Suzu and Julia, Hazuki and Momo, Mayu and Kid again, Micah versus Himeka, and Tam and Julia again. Like it's ridiculous. Like the quality of the tournament has been absurd. And like if there's any place that you should watch to get into Stardom, it is the GP final because that GP final sets you up for the year-end show. It'll tell you who's the next big challenger for the red belt, and you're also going to see one of the best wrestling shows of the year, basically.
Yeah. Obviously that's a few months away. That's like, almost a year away. So if you're trying to get in now, you don't gotta wait until then. But if you fall off at any point and you really want to get back into Stardom or, whatever the case may be, Alex is 100% right. Getting into it at that show, it doesn't matter if you watch the entire tournament. I usually watch the entire tournament because I'm crazy. But if you just watch that last show of the 5 star, it'll almost always deliver, right? Like I mean, even in the weaker years of the 5 star, even you know, I get yeah, 2020 was probably the weakest 5 star I've seen to date. Even then, Himeka and Utami was an interesting final. It really cemented both of them that they had a place at that level,
Hmm.
and it was the crown making moment for Utami, and that was one of the weakest 5 stars I've seen, in 5 years, and I've gone back so even longer than that. Even that was a really great 5 star final. So definitely the 5 star final is probably the biggest show of the year. That is not like the Ryogoku show, you know.
Yeah,
Uh, so yeah, definitely always keep an eye out for that. You will get overwhelmed and possibly even burnt out if you try to watch every single match. But it is definitely a place where you can find your favorite wrestler. If you need to do that as well, because there is a lot of opportunities to see them, obviously. So, if you're kind of say you're treading water in Stardom, you're watching some of the pay-per-views and whatnot over the next few months, and you kind of dig a wrestler, then watch their 5 star. Watch their performances in that, and kind of get to know their move set and get to know what they do in like the average match that they have, because while they are going hard and they are like obviously delivering as much as they can in the 5 star, wrestling 10 matches, 10 very competitive singles matches within 2 months is going to kind of show you the pros and cons, the weaknesses and strengths of each wrestler. And it's very interesting to kind of dive into that once you get a bit more acclimated with the roster. So don't be intimidated by the amount of matches there are. Just watch what you want to watch. But definitely that's the tournament that you're going to be wanting to watch if you are a big fan of those more high stakes, serious, sweaty matches type of thing.
yeah, and I mean, if watching an entire tournament doesn't sound great, then they've kind of made it easy recently in that like the first 2 days and the final usually have the majority of the cool stuff, right? Like the first 2 days last year were on pay-per-view and the final was as well. So like they straight away were like, okay, these are the important ones. So if you don't want to watch everything, then yeah, it's like day one and day two because they're going to be in big venues. Watch the final, and generally they load up the Corkins as well. Yeah, which is a handful
Yeah, I
of
mean,
them.
it falls in line with what we said on the last part of our guide is that, the pay-per-views obviously you should be watching. They are what you are going to want to
Hmm.
watch. Uh, but the Korkins, the Takadana Babas, some of those bigger shows that even if they aren't necessarily live, uh, they will usually have the bigger matches, even in the 5 star. It stays true for the tournament. So, similar to what we said last time, there are obviously going to be shows in the 5 star that are not obligatory viewings because some of them are main evented by just matches that don't really matter, aren't that big stakes, and the rest of the card is similar in tow. So, yeah, definitely keep an eye out for what shows are good because they usually base it on the venue. You know what I mean?
Definitely. Um, and I think that's everything about the 5 star. Um, they do have time limits for the matches. That fluctuates pretty heavily. Like it was 20 minutes one year, it was 15 minutes last year. No idea what it's going to be going forward. 15 seems to suit the entire roster a lot better.
15's 15's the best. Is
Yeah,
the better
because the
seems.
2021 had a 20-minute time limit, and that was a rough tournament. Um,
Yes.
and ever since the 15 has worked out better. So like it depends on that. Um, 2 points for a win, 1 point each for a draw, kind of standard stuff. But yeah, it's time limit can usually change how good or how bad some of the stuff is because uh, I mean wrestling 10, 15 minute time limit matches is going to be a lot easier for them than 20 minute. So that kind of does depend, but otherwise I feel like we've got across the GP is the big one. The GP is the very
Yes.
important one. Winning this is very important. And yeah, in recent years they have followed the New Japan kind of trend of the GP winner challenges at the biggest show, the kind of the big year-end show, depending on how you look at it. Which for Stardom has been Stardom Dream Queendom, and that does kind of lead to an issue where you have the GP winner and you'll have the champion clearly on a collision course, and everything they're doing in between is limbo. Like the
Yeah.
champion clearly isn't going to lose the belt in between, so those defenses lose a bit of their luster. Although last year I thought they did really well at avoiding that because they only had one defense, I think, between them. Um, but there is a bit of a gap.
Poor Micah.
Yeah, poor Micah. But there is a bit of a gap, and I think a lot of people who have maybe watched Puro promotions before are well aware of that kind of fall off after the big tournament because the company is waiting to do the big match. And that does kind of happen in Stardom, but you're usually happy for it because the GP is a very exhausting experience. For us, as people who have been doing Stardom Quest and like watching the entire tournaments for the last few years, it does drain you quite a bit. So the fall off is expected, but sometimes it's you don't really mind.
Yeah. It's a good tournament, but it definitely does. It's a lot of matches. I mean, last year it was 158. I
Mhm.
want to say around there, 160 maybe. It's a lot of matches to watch. And that's not including the recent edition last year. I don't know if they'll keep doing it of the play-in series where they have rookies fight for a spot in the tournament through a smaller tournament. So it's like it's a lot. The 5 star and the things surrounding the 5 star are a lot to watch.
Mm.
So pick and choose with that. Like I said, the 5 star is also the only singles tournament that historically has it is also, well, not the only one because the Cinderella is similar, but it historically is for either championship. After you win it, you can challenge for either championship. Io Shirai actually challenged for the tag titles with Mayu in 2014. So that was a very unique, and that's not going to happen ever again. But
No.
you can challenge for whatever belt you want. Mayu most recently in 2018, she challenged for the Wonder of Stardom Championship instead of the World Championship. Uh, but in the recent years, it has been consistently for the World of Stardom Championship. But if they throw it off and they're like, oh well, I want to challenge for the white belt this year, um, then that's always a possibility. Same thing, vice versa. The Cinderella is usually for the white belt, but occasionally you will see someone challenge for the World Championship outside of, coming out of the Cinderella tournament.
Yeah, like the Cinderella tournament, you get a wish, and like technically that can be for anything, but
Yeah.
it never has been. You get a dress. They present the tournament to you in the Cinderella dress, which is usually very nice.